absolutely fucking sure, because this is a Gumf audio one-off.
Hello, Connor here, and you're listening to Gumf Audio One-Offs. It's a very special episode because I'm going to read one of my short stories to you. It's a story called Shambles, and it's set on Shambles, which is a road in York. For some reason, York has famous roads, and Shambles is one of them. In fact, it's so famous that you can't fucking walk down it because there's about 8 million tourists that will always be stood in your way. What are they there to see? Well, about 7 different Harry Potter bollocks shops. I'm not a fan of Harry Potter, which you'll probably tell when you start listening to the story. We're going to follow a tour guide who isn't necessarily very good at her job, but she's very passionate, and she's trying to solve the mystery of who is stealing her tour. I think this is quite a silly story. I think it's got something for everyone, so let me know what you think. Without further ado, pour yourself a glass of wine, sit back, relax. If you don't drink wine, have a Tizer, and maybe a chalk ice. And let me know what you think of the story. I'll be back at the end, just to see how you're getting on. But without further ado, I'm about to give you the story. Thank you. Shambles, Chapter 1. A woman, clutching at an enormous cardboard box labelled Voldemort Wands times 50, lugs it towards the high street. Behind her, 2 bladdered toffs walk past a bewildered tourist who stares inquisitively at his phone. "Oi, Rob, that Korean food was the best," one toff yells to the other, then repeats for emphasis and most likely banality. "Rob, that Korean food was the best." "Yeah," shouts back the other, Rob. "It was the best." Above them reads a sign, Korean restaurant. Another in the window below, cash only. The sun has begun its slow decline, dipping now far beyond the museum gardens to the west. The street has been in shadow for most of the day, most of its centuries-long existence. The air remains thick with a soupy humidity, and in the sky is a deep, darkening sapphire without a cloud of imperfection. Scurriedly, an out-of-work actor leads a gaggle of money-wasters into this narrow alley of a street. They pause as she stands beneath the Cheesecake Guy's hanging sign. They listen to her as she describes the many ways in which this street reeked about 200 years ago, long before Voldemort's 50 wands, long before Korean food or confused tourists, but not before inebriated toffs. They roamed the walkways of York and crawled through the historic Shambles long before all of this. She's got a cape and a vape in the shape of a briar pipe that she honks on for dramatic effect between sentences. Human piss flavoured. Sets the scene nicely. "So, how many people do we think?" she asks the crowd. Genuinely 7 people, with a thespian twang. "How many people killed on the Shambles since 1887? She clarifies after a pause, so pregnant that it felt contractions. Was it 9? Responds some cretin with a mumble and a Macintosh. That's the jacket, not the computer. "Was it 9 killings? Try 14, boss." She drops theatricality for a moment before clamouring at all of her performative prowess to bring it back. 14 ghastly, spooky murders, boss. The most gruesome of such happened right here, beside this non-licensed Harry Potter merchandise tat shop. The audience, again just over half a dozen people, cast their eyes over to Shambles 9 3/4 on the other side of the 7-foot wide and cobblestoned road. "What was the shop back then? Butcher's? An apothecary?" the anorak asks again, raising his hand like he's in school. "A pret-a-manger," replies the tour guide, with a voice not too dissimilar to a pirate. She's lost the thread on what her character was supposed to be. Sherlock Holmes? Typhoid Mary? Some shit like that. "That's right. The bloodiest of murders happened not 100 years ago, but 100 weeks ago, right here where we stand." One of the Cheesecake Guy's cheesecake patrons, cheesecaketrons if you will, you don't have to, emerges from a door behind the guide and freezes. These dorks weren't here when I went in, he thinks, clutching his New York cookies and cream slice. Guide drops the act for yet another moment, lowering her cloaked arm to reveal a path for Mr. Cheesecake to get through, making sure he's well out of earshot before she continues. It was a stormy September night, just 2 years ago, when Ryan Grouse was found at this spot, his throat slit and gallons of his blood trickling through the cracks of these stones and into these gutters. Casting her eyes over the onlookers, she holds a dramatic silence and revels in their fairly engaged expressions. The twerp in the raincoat is definitely going to chime in here, she thinks for a millisecond, before lo and behold, this prick's hand pops right up. No, there were no witnesses, she says, and his hand slips back into his coat pocket before quickly springing into the air once more. How was he killed? This spod asks. Well, let me tell it, would you? Guide snarls. She figures it's no worries about coming across deranged. Surely everyone's had it with this prick. Like fucking 20 questions and we're literally 2 minutes in, she postulates. That's 10 bastard questions per minute. Our friend Mr. Grouse was a knife salesman, and quite a good one at that. Smiling wryly, there's a chuckle or two at that line for whatever reason. And just as luck had it, he was making a delivery to an establishment here on this very street. Not, as you might expect, however, to his killer. Quick pensive honk on the old vape. If it wasn't pipe-shaped, this would be a mental thing to do, all things considered. The sad fact is, Ryan was unfortunate enough to trip on his untied shoelaces while carrying a plastic bag of kitchen knives, causing a flurry of non-ferrous blades that, ultimately, turned his gullet to confetti. Throat-fetty, if you will. You don't have to. A sea of literally 7 dour faces stare back at her, not a single smirk among them. A good turnout of all the wrong bastards, she thinks. Boring bastards. 7 customers and not a normal among them. Oh fuck, she thinks as well. Odds on one of these lardasses being related to Grouse. Just joked about that poor lad's death through misadventure in front of his own niece or some such junk. Follow me and we'll see the scene of yet another quirky little quirk of this narrow, historic road. She leads them further up the banked street, slowly trudging in the direction of the Minster, slowly enough to review the guest list, hunt for any grouses or grice that might be, let's say, peeved. She's whisking her eyes up and down the 6 names on the list. No grease, no grice, no grouse. Hang about. She stops, stock still, causing a sightseer's pile-up behind her. Guide chuckles to the group. Watch your footing on these historic cobbles. Health and safety wasn't a concern for the Victorians who last paved the street. She whips her head round and counts the faces that force a polite titter in response. 7. 7 of these bastards, only 6 names. One of these fartbags is pinching a tour, and a damn good one at that. Chapter 2. Each and every building they pass pongs of history and bubble tea, just like it did under Dane law. Beneath the feet of each of these inquisitive idiots there lies 2,000 years of history. To their left and right resides 2,000 different names for the same Harry Potter tribe, sold in different rooms by different doofuses who call themselves Potterheads. There's a handful of pubs serving what our toffs call a terrific drop and almost ocean-fresh fish and chips. Though it's mostly empty now, this place was heaving just an hour ago, flooded with overpriced cameras operated by under-inspired travellers who take overexposed photos at under-opportune times. There's a million of them a day, all moving in different directions while staying precisely in your way. Now there's fewer, meaning each of them appear louder. A Roman centurion in 81 AD dreams this scene in its entirety before waking with a start, dripping with sweat and panting up a tempest. Jesus! Him who died 60-odd years ago, he says to the silence of his Eberarchum bedsit while his missus is back in Durocornovium. What kind of underworld would commission so many market stalls that just sell music boxes? He mumbles into his straw pillow and falls back to sleep restlessly. Back in the 21st century, the guide weaves a route through some straggling tourists that deem it necessary to stand stationary in swathes at the centre of what is basically the narrowest road you can imagine. The 6 sad sacks who paid for this tour and their conniving counterpart trail behind her with childlike wonder in their eyes. They veer left, trudging beneath the jetty, the second-storey bit that overhangs, of a Tudor drop-house and into a wide walkway. Beyond them stretches a series of market stalls that grow emptier and emptier by the minute. 2 men cart crate loads of wooden tack cubes, each equipped with a winding handle and inscribed with the name of a 1980s TV show theme. "Little Shambles," it screams in black and white text on the wall above their heads. Guide reins these Burks in with a quick spin that catches their eye and wafts her long cloak, revealing their first glimpse at her footwear, Nike Air Force Ones. She lets them draw nearer without needing to say a word, ushering them in as she looks them over, seeking out the thief. Beside the anorak, there's an elderly couple, each clad in beige chinos and inoffensive polos. 2 middle-aged men, one in tragic glasses, the other in tragic trainers. A sporty woman, around 45, who's watched every ounce of this tour with remarkable attention, and her child, no older than 18 and as androgynous looking as Cillian Murphy. "Here we are, my fellow detectives," Guide calls out, fairly confident that the gist of this one is that she's an investigator and the customers, at least the ones with the decency to pay, are her assistants. "Little Shambles, a market square to you and I, but for the people of York a couple 100 years ago, a bustling street with a ghastly secret." A pensive rip on the vape. Could be a few scenarios at play, she thinks. Sporty Spice pays, thinks her kid gets in free. Garbage glasses over here, brings shit shoes because he doesn't want to come alone, reckons no one will notice. Tourist types in the chinos might have tried to pull a fast one, gives them some sick thrill in their autumn years. Seems unlikely. Anorak's a rogue agent. He's on his own, but he's far too spoddish to steal anything, especially a guided tour. This is a man who's lame enough to respect the craft. Here, in an unassuming thatch-roofed house, lived Mary Hotchkiss, wife to local 1570s priest, Arthur Hotchkiss. The Hotchkisses. The Chinos couple smile and catch each other's eye. They were married, just like we are, they probably think, in tandem. At the age of just 19, after falling in love with a grocer from Fossgate and starting a sordid affair, Mary was stuck with a conundrum. And no, she wasn't planning on setting up a polycule. The guide laughs. Her fellow detectives laugh too, with an air of obligation. Not a single one of them has any idea what a polycule is. Despite Henry VIII getting away with a divorce or two 50 years before it, it still wasn't easy for people to end a marriage legally, especially for God-bothering women who were married to Catholic priests. She gives a sisterly nod to the women, 2, potentially 3 of them present. This left Mary with what she thought was her only option. She got Arthur stinking drunk on communion wine one evening, and while his defences were low, she whipped a quick noose around his neck, nailed it to the windowsill, and lugged the poor priest out that window we can see right there. She points across the market to a first floor, second floor if you're reading this in the USA, window on one of the medieval perimeter structures. It's striped by black painted beams that stand guard against the tide of kitchification that surrounds it. On the pavement below the window, a gammon puffs on a rollie, calmly aware that 8 people have all turned to face him at once. He closes one eye to protect it from the cigarette smoke that swallows his face whole. Doesn't even have his phone out, just raw dogs his gaze right back at this group of inquisitive softies. That could make or break the atmosphere, thinks Guide. Arthur's body wasn't found until the next morning, she starts again, drawing everyone's attention safely back to her. When their maid left the house and clarted her face on Mr. Hotchkiss's skanky cracked heels that dangled from the jetty. She pauses, having offered up the vocabulary carrot for surely one of the group to chomp at. The Chino couple slip into an intrigued expression and their maws open in unison. And what would a jetty be exactly? Male Chino asks at half speed. Oh, right. American, are we? Guide thinks for a fraction of a second, just long enough to realise she's thought it. She can easily anticipate the questions, but she never fails to be shocked by stateside accents. After all, she's in Yorkshire, not a Netflix original. I'm glad you ask. That would be the first floor, well, I suppose you would call it the second floor, bit that overhangs on Tudor houses. It's an architectural quirk of the time that allowed people to have ever so slightly bigger bedrooms than living rooms. Lady Chino raises her hand and Guide addresses the question before it's been asked. Sorry, a living room is where you would put your telly, TV, and your sofa, couch. I suppose you might call it a nook? Or a den? Something like that? Yeah, I understand what a rumpus room is. I was just going to ask what happened to Mary. Ms. Chino asks, keeping her hand aloft until the question is performed to completion, which takes around 7 hours. Mary? Oh, Mary! Hanged. Guy deftly picks a clinger from her nostril as she answers. Yeah, couldn't figure out if it was her or the maid that did it, so they just lynched the pair of them. Ah, gee, goes a whisper between the chinos. Harmless, clueless twerps. The guide flashes a rare, sincere smile. How could people stupid enough to fly 4,000 miles for the sake of a Yorkie pudding wrap ever steal a tour? They couldn't, she decides. The final case of music boxes is slung into the van and the doors close behind it before the vehicle coughs its way across the market and out through the modernised gateway on the far side, turning to its left where it disappears into modernity. The square now houses only the tour group and half a stall of notebooks. Do not open the notebooks, reads a handwritten sign being packed away by a miserable, miserable man. Even our gammon with the cig on has taken his leave. With another swish of the cloak, Guide directs everyone back to from whence they came. Chapter 3. The convoy is moving again. Its fearless leader acts as a cow-catcher, keeping cattle from clipping the carriages behind her by violently and hideously politely muscling her way through the rabble. They catch a brief glimpse of Cheesecake Guy's kingdom in the distant side of the alley road they already explored. Before them lies a new empire of fudge, nestled behind painted mullions and the oglers that stare upon the goods. There's far fewer scrotums called Dobby in the bay windows they pass now, fewer buildings built with 500-year-old wood, and instead smatterings of exposed brick flank them. The ghost of a 1,200-year-old Danish pauper lingers, entirely unobserved by the remnant groups that flit from here to there. He is slumped in a heap on the cobbles, witnessing an endless liminality to which he makes no impact, his resting place ever changing and ever moving around him. With a shriek, he bellows in a dialect now long forgotten and a voice impossibly silent. There's no way to be sure, but he's probably commenting on how many of those massive, ridiculous Stanley-branded cups seem to be knocking about nowadays. Chances are he's completely baffled by how anyone in their right mind could need to carry that much fluid outside of lugging a petrol canister to their car after a breakdown. Still, his words go entirely unheard and eternally misunderstood. Utterly unaware of the spirit's presence, a member of the tour group, probably Anorak, lays a small fart right on the ghoul's face as they pass. They approach a junction that bleeds light onto the paving below them, like the mouth of a cave seen from within. On the junction's corner, Swiggett's memorabilia is hand-painted in block capitals on the black transoms that line its ornate shop windows. Inside there lies piles, no, bigger than that, massive piles of nameless bric-a-brac that toes an infinitesimally small line between tat and treasure. Guide politely prompts her people to shimmy closer to the shop window beside them, where they stand in the slight sunlight. To block the pathway and join the throngs of moronic standers-by was a nightmare she refused to be a part of. She prompts once more until the procession is essentially two-dimensional, smooshed against the window display, with Sporty Spice and her child, Cillian Murphy, at the forefront. "Here we have Swiggett's," she yells. The group was talking among one another, nattering inanely, so Guide decided to do a loud bit. Always nice to feel a bit like a school teacher, she thinks, before continuing her sentence. "This is one of the finest establishments in York when it comes to authentic antiques, collectibles and memorabilia. Not only is this an independent family-run business that has something for everyone, they'll also offer you a great price on any of your historical bits and bobs." She's forcing a smile and trying to avoid looking in at the red-faced shopkeeper who presents himself obviously from the counter, beaming a similarly forced grin. It's fairly plain to see this is some form of sponsorship deal, and Guide is horning this store into the tour, shoe style. The guide checks her blind spot diligently before making a start toward the junction. "Wait!" yells a voice from the group. It's Shit Shoes. Guide doubles back, raising both eyebrows, unaware as to who shouted, but certain it was unwarranted. "What happened here, then?" Shit Shoes shouts again. "Nothing. What do you mean?" She nervously huffs a conspicuous laugh. "They're onto me," she thinks. "They know this isn't part of the tour." "Why have you shown us this place? What happened here, historically?" Gash Glasses joins his friend in his interjecting. "Why have I shown you here?" Guide says to herself, looking the building up and down and desperately trying to summon a speck of history to spout. Her eye catches the shopkeeper, who holds up a vial of vape juice. Roman Snot reads the label. He wiggles it enthusiastically while giving her a point and a hearty thumbs up with the other hand. Her payment as promised. Guide hasn't said anything other than for probably 15 seconds. "The butcher of Beadle, Sherwin Pete," says someone. It's too murmurous to tell who. Guide is fairly sure she didn't say it, then entirely sure when she sees Sporty Spice looking in awe at her child. "This is where he had his butcher shop." The twerps have cast their amazement upon one another now. They each share the same astonished expression as Guide, who strategizes an approach that will allow her to appear as though she knows all about this, while making this young geek do all the speaking. "I know all about this, but why don't you do all the... why don't you let everyone know about Sherman Paul?" she says with deft conversational cunning. "Sherwin Pete," the teenager corrects Guide, with their hands awkwardly resting between both sleeves, wrists connected like a Chinese arm trap. "He was a butcher in the early 19th century who owned a shop on these premises." The kid is facing the crowd, who watch with as much enthusiasm as ever, with Guide visible in the periphery behind their new host. "He worked on this street for around 10 years, and what people didn't know is that he'd been serving up actual human meat in his stock the entire time," Nerd number 1 continues, pouring forth a well-delivered stream of Wikipedia-worthy video essay. "It's believed that he hired staff from the hundreds of homeless people who populated the outskirts of York, killing them at the end of their shifts and dicing them for the next employee to serve the following day." With an almost embarrassed nod, the kid turns back to face Guide, their mum proudly clutching at their shoulders. "Jesus, what kind of special interest neurodivergence are we witnessing here?" thinks the Guide. "Did I ever care as much as this dingus?" A tidal wave of an obscure insecurity instantly crashes onto Guide as each face before her reads, "I sure wish we had that tween as our tour guide instead of this poor semi-employed woman who still has to do her washing at her parents' house." How do they know about the washing? Good Lord, what else do they know? "Almost right," Guide winces, as if it brings her no great joy critiquing the young goober's piece. "It was the late 18th century, and he was actually only active on this street for around 3 years. He moved his shop to a site closer to the Minster when he was eventually struck with syphilis, dying before the local constabulary could discover his crimes." All bollocks, of course. The Guide moves her sights to the rest of the group, where the losers seem to have forgotten all about how she doesn't know how to use a washing machine. Slightly below the other faces, the youth mixes dejection with disbelief. Oppenheimer here knows Guide is wrong, but it would take a far more confident usurper than them to pursue the truth on this matter. Dejection wins over as the kid drops their head, investigating the paving slabs with the sole of their Converse. "Let's give a big Shambles round of applause for our young historian here, however." Guide scrambles to assuage the new tide of guilt that begins to lap at her waist. "Is there a career in history I can see in the future here?" This is the most pantomime Guide has been, even more than her days in actual pantomime. There's no mistaking her desperation here. Sporty Spice rubs her hand up and down the small of her child's back in a futile attempt at reassurance, while a small ovation from the group comes to a close. As far as mums go, she's furious and ready to write some kind of letter or tweet. All the while, the child sinks further into emotional destitution. It's strange to see a parent give it Violet Beauregard while the kid's gone all Charlie Bucket. It's a small mercy, thinks Guide. Tours are a cutthroat business. Get out before you're in, kid. The thought isn't enough to levy that insatiable shame she's feeling. Thief or not, this pair's off the list of suspects. They could tell the twerps they didn't pay a single red cent for this tour and Guide wouldn't be able to do a thing. You can't dash the last of a child's enthusiasm and ruin a fantastic tour in one day. It just wouldn't be right. Chapter 4. Some Victorian geezer finds himself in the same place about 100 years before any of the tour's occupants were born. Top hat, doofy big suit, the lot. He's livid because he's got to find a new servant for his house on what ends up being the A1036. Also, his wife's got a fair bit of cholera going on, so that's been a whole headache. He stands at the gates of a dilapidated church where 12 ornate tombstones litter a small lawn before the low wall. He's trying to maintain the distinguished attitude that his outfit is giving off, but it's hard for him to do so when he's on the hunt for desperate, unemployed yobs. They make the best servants, he's noticed. Find yourself a destitute old dear with a touch of consumption and give her literally any quantity of food and maybe a tuppence a week. Your chambers are getting well and truly dusted, mate. Daily. In this day and age, the 1850s, withering old biddies can't take a walk to the offie without being offered half a baker's dozen housekeeping jobs. He spies some deer down Church Street, backdropped by the minster and covered in self-pity. He lopes his way down the road, whipping his walking stick a foot ahead of him with every other step. Reeks of Michael Caine in Muppet's Christmas Carol. In an instant, he's upon her, at which point he lets a handkerchief slip from the inside of his tailcoat, where he has hollowed the lining for this very purpose. "Sir, sir," she calls behind him as he continues his stride. "Excuse me, sir." Hook, line, and sinker. He stops, then pivots on his heels, like a netball player in slow motion in a starched collar. "Yes?" he asks with a demeanour that would be considered fairly daft in 200 years' time. This poor ducky just dangles the little snot cloth with her outstretched arm while hobbling miserably towards him. "My goodness, thank heavens! I surely would have been lost without it. Thank you, kind stranger." He's laying it on thick, and suddenly there's an unexpected silence as she's not walked away or said another word. The usual shtick is that the old mare would politely bid him adieu and start to amble away, at which point he would say, "Wait, kind stranger, could I trouble you once more?" This one, however, was watching the gent, waiting for his next word. This takes some time to arrive, and after a deeply uncomfortable moment, she mutters, "Room, board, and 6pence a week." "I'm sorry, what?" He's surprised, but not for the reasons he's trying to express. "I live 2 streets from my nearest offie. You're the 3rd toff to do the handkerchief move. Last one offered 2pence. Told him to fuck himself." "4pence, and you make daily cleanings of my bedpan," he replies, deadpan. "Deal." They shake hands with proud aplomb, then plod off together to find a bridge to cross the river and reach his gaff. "Oh, shite," he says aloud to himself with stark realisation. "I forgot to get leeches for the missus." Chapter 5. There's a fire eater gobbling up a bit of flames on the spot where the dilapidated church once stood. When you bear in mind that it's about 8:30 p.m, that's insane, isn't it? A gaggle of gimps are gawping at the guy as he belches up a couple infernos, and they chuck him some pennies and tap the smartphones on his card reader. That's no way to make a living, the guide says to herself. When you bear in mind she's a tour guide, that's insane, isn't it? Her flock follows her as they exit the inane narrowness of the shadowy street behind them and onto the wide open air of King's Square. It's far bigger than it was in the day of our Victorian gentlemen, but still it boasts no more than an open space, a few trees and 13 paving slabs made from the old church's headstones. It's on one of these that the guide plonks her Air Force Ones and raises both arms to rein in the money wasters that had become distracted by Johnny Eaterflame over there. History is loudly absent from this place, be it because there stands more than 10 feet between each side of the road, or because of the undeniably pristine levelling of the street. The past has been wiped clear, all save for these slabs that read the names of people whose lives, their entire existences, are no longer comprehensible. Regis Morrison is inscribed beneath the guide's trainers, a prominent businessman and social reformist of 150 years ago, who now is known only as the Floor, and shall do forevermore. "Who can tell me where we are right now?" Guide cries out for some rare audience participation. Cillian Murphy remains non-verbal at the back of the gaggle, licking their wounds. At the front are Shite Shoes and Gash Glasses, who chuckle silently to one another, because it's all so obvious to them. This would be King's Square." The badly bespectacled one of them raises his hand and answers with awkward shuffling movements that he makes subconsciously to mitigate the discomfort of speaking with his Yorkshire accent. Unexpectedly, his feculent footwear-flaunting friend plants a soft palm on the back of Crap Glasses' neck and keeps it there reassuringly. "That's friendly," thinks Guide. "That's correct," says Guide. "This open space was once no more than about a third its size, until the early 1900s when the York City Council decided to expand it in a bid to create more places for wanky street performers." She projects the last three words far and wide until they reach the fire eater, who burps up some embers in disgust while he packs away his bits. "Another masterstroke from York City Council there," she says, jutting out her elbow as if to nudge an invisible appreciator of the joke. There's a dull chuckle from the onlookers. They're tired, less responsive. Gash Glasses sucks his teeth with an embarrassed, almost frustrated grimace, to which Shit Shoes slides the reassuring palm from shoulder to hip, pulling his pal closer. "Hang about," thinks Guide. "These aren't just gaudy, gormless guys. They're gaudy, gormless gay guys. No offence to any council workers in our midst. The city's come a long way since the Edwardian era," she says, practically directly to Gash Glasses while she huffs on a vape. "None taken," he lies. "Nobody dislikes the council more than somebody who's worked there for 10 years. His audience chuckles and he returns the gaze of his Gash Glasses down to his regular shoes. "Problematic planning aside, before its expansion, this square was host to a cast of unsavoury characters in the Middle Victorian era." She begins the history bit of this particular set piece. "The kind that give gregarious guides like me something to go on about." There is a thief in this crowd, Guide reminds herself. Someone has stolen the admission fee of this honestly remarkable tour and received almost all of its insightful info for free. With their gogglebox-worthy dorkiness and liberal appeal, this desperately dressed and albeit adorable couple are the last suspects left to be analysed. Long before stranger danger was a public concern, this was a hotbed for nefarious ne'er-do-wells, like Margaret Albright. She casts her cloak to point to one end of Colliergate, the road that borders the square, right to the other end. Mrs. Albright, at the age of 65, quite the age back in the day, would roam these roads day in, day out. She would hobble with sickness and injury in order to garner sympathy from passers-by. The crowd is suckered perfectly into the sympathy snare set by Guide. She was perfectly healthy, of course. This is a clever trick of hers for befriending wealthy gentlemen who would, on occasion, bring her home for some warm food. "Naw," hums Shit Shoes, as sympathetic smiles are plastered over the faces of the gauchely garmed gay guys at the front of the pack. "That's when Maggie would knock these fools out with a cudgel and ransack their gaffs." Guide finished the tale with a blunt flourish. When the constabulary caught up with her, they found a small fortune in jewellery, fine wines and antiques. They reckoned she hit more than 25 houses before she was caught. "Cheeky mare," chimes Shit Shoes. "Sounds like the mother-in-law," quips Gash Glasses with cutting quickness that earns a jab from his partner. Everyone's in hysterics. This is audience interaction at its greatest, thinks Guide. These guys ain't crooks, Guide decides. This is Will and Grace. This is Queer Eye. This isn't the real hustle. There's not a bad bone in these boys. For the sake of cripes, one of them works for the council. That's dork occupation 101. You can't steal from the city of York when you're literally a servant to it. But if not them, then who? The Chino couple were out. Too feckless. Too American. Sporty Spice and her androgynous offspring? Too heartbroken. Too breakable. Our two twerps have proven themselves to be too cute. Too real. Plus, gay guys don't steal. Was that homophobic? Guide can't tell, but she figures it's probably that good kind of homophobia that makes it easier for them to get jobs. Then she wonders if that was homophobic too and decides to drop the thread entirely. The point is this. They stood at the front of the group, clear as day, making themselves a part of the show. No thief would have the ghoulies to do that. A thief cares about the tour, that's why they steal it, but they stay hidden, distancing themselves, cultivating the delicious facts and garnering none of the insidious suspicion. A good thief is invisible. The world moves in slow motion as Guide casts her eyes upon the chortling onlookers, the young, the old, the harmless, who look at their pairings and share in the moment. All of them are sure to speak of this great day with their counterparts. Then she sees it, the one among them who doesn't share the moment. The one who is just that. One. Someone who held a spotlight early on and was smart enough to step out of it. Full of questions and suddenly full of silence. There he stands, at the rear of the group, a distant smile upon his face and a truly awful windbreaker on his back. The anorak has not paid, Guide realises, and the world returns to normal speed. He stares on from the back of the pack, unflinching as the expression changes to venomous anger on the face of his guide. The laughing has stopped, and a group of 7 watches, waiting for the next turn of this tour. That is the story of Margaret Albright. A thief, she says bluntly, eyes fixed squarely onto Anorak. A filthy, no-good thief. Chapter 6. Nobody speaks as a malaise of tension descends onto the group and the remnants of the last joke spoken evaporates into the ether. This is the perfect time for a change of scenery, change of tone. That never comes. Who likes thieves? Guide blankly asks the group. The street is now devoid of performers and caricaturists. Even the rabble, the never-ending stream of goofus tourists, has dried to a trickle, one occasional drop of camera-clutching clownery. Not enough to clear the air. The air is still humid and awkward. All eyes are fixed squarely on Guide, who perches the vape in the shape of a briar pipe between her teeth, where she can huff upon it without removing the hands from behind her back. This is nearly the end of our time together, deputies. An excellent time to bring it back to the theme, whatever that was. Our last case is one of recent history, however. Very, very recent history. She is pacing up and down the square, which has diffused some of the tension, not that she intended to. Small smirks creep upon the faces of the money wasters. Among you is the latest villain to be added to York's rich history of criminal crimes doers. She's going off script, losing it. Who here paid for their ticket to this tour? She asks the question that has burned in her mind for what feels like hours, but was more like 45 minutes or so. Everyone raises their hand after 10 seconds of uncertainty. Uncertain what she's doing, uncertain what's going on, uncertain what all this was all about. Every hand is held aloft, proudly, if not awkwardly. Every hand but one. You. Guide squares her finger directly to Anorak, who tightens his lips together with such tenacity that he begins to resemble a sock puppet. In the final hour, he has fallen prey to his conscience and outed himself. This scumbag, thinks Guide. What am I? Some kind of busker? Does this prick think he can march in and out of a tour without chucking his pennies in the hat? He can't have gotten lucky. This guy must have looked up tours in York, found out where and when I was doing this, and made a pointed decision to come without paying. In the olden days, they'd probably have chopped this guy's hand off, she guessed, strangely uncertain considering her profession. It was time to publicly shame this publicly lame twat. Do you think it's acceptable to steal a guided tour? A tour I have rehearsed and honed for literally dozens of hours? Do you think you're above paying for this service like these good people here have? She spits vitriol in venomous form at this fool. He is speechless, and an expression of impertinence on his face renders Guide speechless. Well, are you above paying just as these good people have? The group between them splits in half, building a channel of empty space between Anorak and Guide. She gets a good look now at him in his anorak, that raincoat with its oddly familiar logo. Well, yes, he says, now confused and on the spot. What? I would love to hear your rationale. Guide is frustrated, taking deeper and deeper puffs on the pipe. What makes you so special? I believe you already know. I'm your supervisor. His voice is embarrassed, only somehow it is abundantly clear his embarrassment is for her. A lead weight of around 45 kilograms summons itself in Guide's gullet, wrenching her stomach 6 inches to the ground and her attention directly to the logo on Anorak's raincoat. Familiar. As familiar as the logo for your employer can be. Erstwhile Tours is as clear as day beneath a crest that's reminiscent of the Fred Perry logo, come to think of it. What? I didn't... Guide is moments away from puking. I sent you an email this morning. I let you know a representative from the agency would be sitting in on one of your tours today. Did you not see it? He laughs, half outraged, half amazed. No. As a matter of... No clue. And to what do I owe the honour of an observation? She tries to piece back some indignation. Well, if you would like for us to continue this brutal honesty in front of your paying customers, we have received a number of complaints about your tours. That's enough to rock Guide's world all over again. Complaints? How can anyone complain about fantastic tours? She looks upon her audience who fail to even remotely reassure her. Almost none of your pieces are historically or factually accurate. There isn't a single historical source that can verify what you've said today, he states bluntly. Right? She is unfazed. What's more, when I attempted to give you opportunities to provide more information, when I asked questions about your tales, you told me off and scolded me. Now that I know you were unaware that I was not a paying customer, I can only assume that's behaviour you exhibit on every tour. He's ironclad, this guy. He's got his case sorted out from top to tail. The Guide stews. She mulls and she ponders with an apparent anger, although to whom the anger is aimed is up for debate. Finally, she settles on an escape. That is the end of our tour, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and please, an applause for my co-performer here. We like to end the tour on a little bit of a joke, and I do believe my supervisor and I had you going. She begins clapping before anyone else, and after some faint pleasantries and discomforted farewells from the paying customers, she is alone on the square with the duplicitous Anorak. Not a tourist in sight. The sky has darkened above her, too slow for her to realise until this moment. The air, still warm, blows in a current that glides through the historic Shambles and vents onto the square in an almost cool breeze. Another name beneath her feet. She reads it upside down as she stares awkwardly to the floor, and the Anorak watches her. Annabelle Taylor, reads the tombstone, along with dates of her beginning and end. Now just a name. Better to be nameless, thinks Guide. I'll write an email with my report to you tomorrow, Lisa, states Anorak, and his words leave no echo, no resonance on the hard stone walls. He leaves through one of the many channels out of the square and out of mind. Gash! Curses Guide under her breath as she scuttles towards Shambles and into the shadows of the evening. She joins a league of spirits from the eons, destined to desperately dawdle the dank Shambles, from cave blokes to cavaliers, Vikings to vagabonds and scrotums named Dobby. Together, they make the place what it is today. Wank. The end. You're right. It's me again. That's the end of the story, so thank you very much for listening. If you did get this far and you didn't just skip to the last minute so that you could give us the listen on Spotify or whatever. In fact, if you did do that, I appreciate that as well. That's very kind of you. If you want more Gumf magazine, more writing like this, more hijinks, go to gumfmag.com. We're regularly writing silly articles, and you can buy copies of Gumf magazine, which is where we put all of our bollocks, including short stories like this, and poems, and fake news, and any other such shit that we think might make you laugh. Also, let us know on Facebook and Instagram if you enjoyed it. God knows we love a compliment, as few and far between as they are. And please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it, and give it a thumbs up or a 5 stars or whatever the fuck the rating system is. And we'll let you know when we put another episode out, when we can be arsed. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
And this was the Gumf Audio One-Off.